beautiful human beings. Oh, hello, beautiful human beings. Hi, Max. I was going to type in the comments because it was loading for a second, but I'm so happy to see you guys here. Hey, Max, Jake, Stuart, Anna, SW, Shannon. Okay, good. I thought Shannon Vial, or maybe I shouldn't say your last name, but I think I know exactly who you are. And you guys all have some really insightful comments and shares. Greetings from San Antonio, Texas. Wow. This is so beautiful. Jake, good for you for like coming up with the energy. Good to see you, Shannon. Good for you for coming up with the energy to do this. That's a really, really powerful, inspiring story, Jake. I'm happy to see this. Wonderful stuff. So I'm excited you guys are here live. And if you have any questions during this whole webinar, then let me know. Do you want to start off for a minute and just let me know any questions you guys are having so far? What's cool about this and the live versions is that we have a much smaller audience who can attend live at the certain times. So what we can do is I can answer your questions like a little more personally in this area. So do you guys have any questions so far about the platform, about the school, about anything that's going on? Because I want to take a few moments, answer questions, go through some stuff, and then I'll dive into the webinar content for today. And after we do the webinar content for today, then we'll go into more questions about the actual webinar content itself. So do you guys have any questions so far? And I'd love to hear like what your favorite course might be, or what any feedback you guys have in general, something you want to see more of. Like I will always, my whole journey here of doing this school will be to constantly learn as much and get as much feedback as possible about all of the experiences you guys are having, so I can keep updating, changing things, providing more value however I can. So if you guys have any questions, let me know. Hi, AJ. I'm so glad to hear that, AJ. So my Q&A, so cool, this is good. So we'll open this up and just like ask some questions and get your questions answered, especially because you guys are here earliest. I think we'll have more people log in as time goes on. So I'll go through the early questions first, and then we'll dive into the content. So AJ says, hi, Thais, thank you for your videos. They're keeping me going through bad times just now. For my Q&A, my ex, fearful avoidant, replied to a letter agreeing with the anxious avoidant dance. My ex, fearful avoidant, replied to a letter agreeing with the anxious avoidant dance, and that she had shut off and pushed me away. She said okay for us to be messaging sometime. However, I still have no idea how she feels about me, but I know not to ask her again or tell her that I want to try again, as I don't want to push her away again. I want to try to have text conversation with her a few days at a time, but I'm scared she'll try to fill the anxious side, loving connection with someone else. Is this likely? Is she trying to have small conversations? Is trying to have small conversations all I can do? Any advice with the situation would be great. Okay, so great question. I just want to see. So AJ, are you anxious? Do you identify as anxious? Hi, Jesse and Jake. Do you identify as being anxious, AJ? Because what I would say, I'm imagining yes, okay, perfect. So what I would say is that it's going to be very important to set clear expectations about how much communication is good as a relationship is. I just want to see your ex, fearful avoidant. Okay, so how long have you been out of the relationship for? Because that will make a big difference. If you've been out of the relationship for a short period of time, my advice would be to follow up with 2 months. Okay, perfect. So, and have you been in communication almost the whole 2 months? Because all these factors sort of play in here, and it's good because other people who are going through these sorts of experiences will be able to relate. So if you find that you've had somewhat constant communication, what I would say is that fearful avoidants can go one of two ways. They can go into like the anxious side and try to fill their cup through other people and other relationships. But generally, they're going to be little texts here and there. Yeah, generally, they're going to be pretty reclusive and sort of turned off and shut down for a little while. And so if this is you in the situation, it's been 2 months she's fearful avoidant. She's still talking to you here and there. Right around the 2-month mark, they're going to start to feel, maybe not quite 2 months. It's going to be quite a bit earlier. It's going to be like 3 to 4 weeks. You'll start to see her like come back online and like miss you a little bit and be a little more communicative. So right around that time is when you can start sort of capitalizing. So a couple things. So number one, AJ, I would say the most important thing to do is to check in with yourself. Is this the right person? Like, what were the downsides? Why did the relationship not work? Is this person willing to meet you halfway? These are the questions we have to ask ourselves first. Because if it's like there was a lot of fighting or there were a lot of misunderstandings and now we understand attachment theory and things are changing and opening up and we think we can try again and it's coming from a healthy space, and that's wonderful and I fully support that. But if this is coming from a space where it's like a little bit of panic and I'm just missing this person and I'm just trying to sort of kill the sting of my pain of the breakup and I just really want to get back together with them, even though it might be unhealthy, then we want to reconsider our options. So if you think she's healthy enough and she's doing the work and she'll put her best foot forward and she's open to this stuff and she knows about attachment theory, wonderful. If she's not open to working on herself, then you're probably going to run into the same problems. I would say fearful avoidance are the single most difficult. It's hard to say, but probably the most difficult attachment style to be with if they're not doing work on themselves, because everything's like a minefield. Their subconscious mind has a lot of stored triggers and painful associations, and you're kind of like walking on the minefield hoping not to trip one of the triggers at all times. So if it's a healthy enough situation and you think that there's a possibility of reconnection in a positive way, then in that case, I would advise a couple things. Keep having these little texts here and there, and then at some point have some kind of deep conversation. When there's been a little bit of connection over time, dive into a deep conversation at some point, like, hey, expressing your feelings and needs, and tell her it's very important for the fearful avoidant to know out of a relationship that when they express their feelings and needs, you are open to meeting them. Because a lot of fearful avoidants repress their own feelings and needs for a long time, then leave a relationship because their subconscious mind is like so overwhelmed, like feeling like they're always meeting the other person's needs and not talking about their own. Because fearful avoidants will be very hyper attuned to others' needs, but they'll be very afraid of being vulnerable. So they won't express their own. And then they'll just feel like relationships entail a lot of pressure and stress and all of that. So it's an important reminder to let her know at some point, hey, if there are feelings or needs you had that you weren't expressing, I would have been so happy to listen to them and connect with them if you would express them differently. So at some point when you feel like there's a little bit of connection, you want to either ask to like maybe meet for coffee or have a deeper conversation or start some kind of deeper conversation over text. I know it's really scary, but that's what the fearful avoidant is very much looking for. They want some kind of depth. They want an acknowledgement. They want to feel seen, heard. They want to feel understood. They want to know that you deeply care without expectation. They want to know that you deeply care without any pressure coming into the relationship dynamic. So in whatever form it takes, depending on the relationship you have, yeah, I understand. It's not easy. It's scary stuff, right? So AJ says, yes, I want to build up conversation, but I'm scared for saying how I feel because she might just run. And so the question I would ask you is, if you care about her enough and you want things to work, and if you think it's a healthy thing, then you would take the risk knowing that at least whatever happens, you did your part. You showed up 100% in your 50% of this dynamic. And you can at least at the end of the day be regret-free, knowing that you showed up and did what you thought was necessary and right to take the chance. And if it doesn't work, it definitely wasn't meant to work out. So I would say build up when there's a little bit more of connection. You don't have to talk about how you feel right away. You can instead just ask her, open depth in the dynamic. How are things? How's she feeling? Share different things. The idea is to build deeper connection where you're making the person, the fearful avoidant, feel seen. That's the biggest thing for the fearful avoidant. When they feel seen, they're like, and they get all of these strong feelings. Does major stress in her life affect this? Yes, it does. Major stress in a person's life will affect it. They will be a little bit more toned down and reclusive. But if you ask her about the major stress and give her a safe space to have a conversation, then she'll actually feel like, oh my gosh, I can go to you through this stress. So if you sort of ask a little bit about her and make her feel seen in it, that will be really effective. But again, I'm giving you all this information, asking you to keep very strongly in mind that the idea is to make sure that you are being fair to yourself, that this is the right thing, and showing up for your boundaries at the same time. Okay, I hope that's helpful. It's a great question and a great share. Let's go back up here for a second. So Stuart says, hi Stuart. I was wondering what is the best strategy to stop comparing myself to others? Awesome. The best strategy to stop comparing yourself to others, this is the best piece of information I can give you. we all, and this course is in, if you haven't done the course already, Stuart, the course is in the personal development school. So we all, it's in your needs area. We all have a very individual set of subconscious personality needs, and they determine so much about us. So much about us. So our individual set of personality needs, let's pretend, for example, it's me, and let's say mine are, I'll tell you what mine are. I don't want to use mine because it'll go in opposition of the example. I was speaking to somebody the other day, and she was saying her personality needs were social, emotional connection, spirituality, and comfort. And so these were her personality needs. Now, if she compares herself to somebody, she was saying to me in this conversation, I feel frustrated because I feel like I'm not as far ahead in my career as the rest of my family members are. And, I feel like I'm always falling behind. And when we looked at her family members' personality needs, the one she was comparing herself to, their personality needs were like achievement, success, wealth building, like all these very success-oriented drivers. And so I said to her, like, well, if you compare yourself in your needs, your personality structure, you're probably showing up better in your spiritual connection to God, in your social connections and commitments, your emotional connections and deeper close friendships and relationships. You're probably showing up better in those areas because that's what your personality is structured around and focused on. And so we spend a lot of time comparing ourselves to people who have a different set of wiring, a different set of needs that drive them. And at the end of the day, our subconscious mind is responsible for 95 to 97% of all of our decisions, actions, behaviors, and our conscious mind only responsible for roughly 3 to 5%. So whatever our deep subconscious personality needs are, those drivers, we're going to be showing up well in those areas in whatever form that takes. And so when we compare ourselves to others, we have to remember it truly is like comparing apples to oranges, because we are comparing ourselves to individuals with a totally different set of personality needs and a totally different set of wiring and intentions and things that their subconscious is moving them towards. So I find that to be one of the most useful pieces of information for people who get stuck in that comparison space, because it's asking you to recognize that your comparison itself is comparing two things that cannot actually be compared. It's like, again, apples to oranges. It's futile. And so looking for that and trying to recognize, hey, I have a different set of needs that governs me than the person I might be comparing myself to is very powerful. And then the secondary piece of advice I would give to you is that as you go through this experience of noticing yourself comparing, there's some kind of strategy that's there. There's some kind of need that's being met. And that's why your brain hangs on to the program. So your brain thinks on some level that comparing you is serving you. And you want to ask yourself, what does my subconscious mind think the need is that's being met? And we're going to talk a lot about this today in this webinar's presentation. What does my subconscious mind think the need is that's being met that keeps me locked in doing this? Does it think that I remind myself of what I can't do so I don't do those things and I keep myself safe? Does it think that if I keep comparing myself, I'll compete more and I'll get a competitive edge? Whatever, try to notice whatever that need is and then try to meet that need in an updated form. So try to create more safety in your life by over preparing for things or over planning things instead of comparing yourself and diminishing yourself and then using that to stay in your comfort zone. Or try to be more competitive by competing with yourself and having active habits and strategies to like track your improvements and your growth and do things that are competing with yourself. So update whatever need is being met through the comparison itself. And again, you'll start to see comparison falling away. And then the third thing is that I would just say, be aware in your internal dialogue. This doesn't feel good. Here I go comparing myself. And I notice the pattern, and just through repetition plus emotion, I create an updated strategy. Like, I don't need to compare myself to this person. I am valuable. I am worthy. Whatever it is, try to upgrade your thinking when you notice it popping up, so that, again, the repetition of thoughts doesn't just ingrain that programming further. Okay, so those are the three main strategies I would give you for that. I hope that's helpful, and it's a great question. Okay, perfect. So Jake, hi Jake. On my road to becoming a better me, I like that. I've been through an abundance of self-realization and attachment videos that filled in my last understanding as to why my life has been so hard in relationships. It's been 8 weeks, no contact, no online traffic, no existence anywhere. I miss them. At this point, I just want to know that my daughter's okay. My ex is super, super avoidant. This is the longest time in 5 years we've been apart. No phone, no way to get a hold of her. She knows my email and she knows my phone number. I reached out to her family, no reply. And then that's all you said. Okay, so it sounds to me, Jake, like you're a fearful avoidant. Because I saw your comment after that says absolutely AJ when he asked about fearful avoidance. So I would say that the best, most important thing you can do, because you shared a little bit about your story at the beginning, the best, most important thing you can do by far and away is to focus on your own healing first. The most important thing a parent can give to their children or child is the gift of their own happiness and their own well-being, because they show up through the rest of their life stable, safe, a safe person to go to in terms of advice and emotional vulnerability and all these different things, because you are rooted in yourself. And I know it can probably be so difficult at this time. I can't even imagine. But the best thing you can do, 2 things. Keep sending little consistent emails if possible, little tiny things. Hey, I care about you guys. I'm here. Just little things so that there's consistency, so that the dismissive avoidant ex or wife sees that, because they respond well to that consistency. And to send things about your daughter in that same space, even if she's not going to hear everything, even if she's not going to read all the emails or anything, that's there as a reference point for way later in time. If she ever has questions or concerns, like, oh, what happened during that time period, you can say, listen, I went through a hard time. I had to go get things straight for myself. I knew that that was the only way I could be there to be the best father I can be possible in the future. And during this time, I still checked in and I emailed you all the time. I've spoken to many clients over the years who have had little bouts of separation from their parents or little challenges that have arisen. And when they had these moments of knowing that their father always wrote letters or their mother always tried to check in through email or whatever it might be, that is so profound for them. It's like, wow, that person was always there and always loving me. And so I would recommend doing that in whatever way possible. And I would also recommend showing up for yourself first and foremost. Like, do those little things, but focus on yourself, focus on your healing, go deeply inwards. It sounds like you're going through a beautiful sort of awakening to yourself. Like you said, self-realization, and nothing will heal you more than your own awareness at this time. So the more you educate yourself, the more you grow and go inwards and deeply dive into noticing your thought patterns, your emotional patterns, everything, and then creating updated strategies and solutions, you have all of that awareness inside of you. You can have people like myself who are, facilitators and helpers along the way and share tools. But at the end of the day, you'll always have the answers if you sit with yourself for long enough. You really, really will. And so keep that relationship to yourself open and strong and keep nurturing that. And you will see beautiful, beautiful things come out of it. And I've been in my own place where I had a lot of recovering to do at a point. I went through some really painful challenges and I just stuck to I'm going to show up for myself and keep healing and keep digging into myself and trying to just understand, not judge any patterns, not do any of that, but just keep trying to understand and peel back the layers and connect more deeply. And that was the healing. And so anybody can do that at any moment. And it's just, are we present enough with ourselves? Are we sitting enough with ourselves? Are we spending time in silence? Are we noticing our patterns? Are we in meditation? I highly recommend meditating. And you'll see the layers pull back. And that's where real healing takes place, in my opinion, is when we really get to know and get really still and sit with ourselves. So you can do that. And it sounds like you are well on your way, Jake, and you should be really proud of yourself. So thanks for that beautiful question. So I think that's so another couple of questions in here. Okay, so hi, Jesse. In the PS website, where is the preferable place to post comments, questions, and share experiences? Is it best we do it in the Facebook group? So I would say the forum. I just went into I didn't realize that the forum was in that space as well, but in the webinar area, in the forum, you can post comments there. I think that's the best place. But I can also see when I go through the videos and check in on the different modules, I can see where discussions are posted there. So our goal is to have every question answered within 72 hours, whether it's through Facebook, whether it's through webinar, whether it's through the forum itself. But the forum is the best place because it's the most accessible. So I think if this is Jesse, the Jessie I'm thinking of. I don't want to like give out your last name or information if you don't want it to be there, but I think I saw your questions in the discussion forum, and I responded to them 2 days ago or yesterday. So I would go and check in there and see. But that's the best place. So under the forum, in the webinar, in the members lounge, that's the best place because we can keep sort of just going through and seeing all the general questions. I think that's a great place to sort of help each other out. So great question, and thank you for asking that. And then the next question. Hi, Vicky from Australia. I know it's probably like 9 o'clock there. Is it 9 o'clock there? I think something around that time. So thanks for being here on your Saturday evening. And hi, Anna. My DA and I broke up after 5 years. It's been 2 weeks and I'm trying to follow your advice for breakups. It helps. And I realize I don't know my needs at all. Okay, so Anna, for you to be properly prepared, great comment. For you to be properly prepared for any single healthy relationship, especially when it's with a dismissive avoidant, like times 1,000 million, you have to know your needs. So in the needs course, there's like your personality needs, your primary basic human needs, your tertiary needs. I would go through all of those and I would get really clear, and I would just practice for like a week or two, sitting in the evening and journaling about my day and what I felt about the different times throughout the day and what I needed during those moments. And I would get really comfortable asking the question to myself as much as possible, every hour if possible. What am I feeling right now? And what do I need? And the more you're asking yourself that question, what do I feel? What do I need? The more you will be able to tune into yourself, get aware of what your needs are, and then the easier it becomes to communicate them. And I honestly think that it's not possible to have a healthy relationship with a dismissive avoidant unless you are a superstar at practicing communicating your needs. You don't have to be batting 100 or do it all the time, but you have to be a superstar in the very early stages at committing to practicing. You're not going to do it perfectly all the time. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to forget. You're going to go unconscious because you're going to be more tuned into their needs than yours. And it's just get back up and keep practicing and be a superstar at that commitment to yourself. And over time, that dismissive avoidant partner actually becomes a gift for you to be reminded that you have to communicate your needs. And once you practice it enough, then you'll be able to re-enter into that space with like a healthy dynamic going on. So very, very important. Start with yourself first. Practice as much as possible, asking yourself that question. Get really familiar and go from there. Great question. Vicky, I know this isn't related to what we're talking about, but something is really torturing my mind. My chest heart has been hurting for the whole day, and I feel like throwing up. I'm anxious. Who recently asked you about how to get back together with my avoidant ex. I'm confused. He texted me first twice. No, and then I replied, but after I replied, he doesn't reply anymore. So I send a message every 3 to 4 days. So I texted him the first day before yesterday. He said, hey, I saw a video earlier and it reminded of you. But I can't. Oh, sorry, your comments. But when I see him in person at uni, he'd be really nice and tell me how he's only been studying and working. So I assume that he's not with someone else. But I can't help it because my mind keeps telling me that he might be with someone else now. So he doesn't want to reply to me, and that's hurting me and torturing me. I even had a dream the other night where I witnessed him sleeping with someone else. Okay, so what you want to do, I've been really jealous, and one of the reasons we broke up was that I kept making things in my brain the most negative possible. Okay, so I see all of this. Okay, your brain is just trying to protect you first and foremost. Okay, so it's been 6 months. Okay, so it's been a while since you broke up. I thought it was like sort of soon or recently. Okay, so a couple things, Vicky. So number one, you really want to start connecting to yourself. Notice that in your thoughts, you abandon yourself a lot. You go to him and his business, and nobody's here like doing you and doing your business and showing up for yourself. Okay. So notice that if that's happening and you keep sort of abandoning yourself, thinking about him, you lose yourself in the relationship to yourself in the process. To be quite perfectly honest, as I read all these messages, I super appreciate your awareness. I think you've got a lot of awareness. I think you're noticing your thoughts. I think it's beautiful. But I think that before you go into any relationship with him or at any point with somebody in the future, you really want to get back into a relationship with yourself, because I get the sense that you're so concerned about him and not concerned enough about you. So a couple things I would do is I would start having habits like rituals of connection. So number one, I would sit with yourself and I would spend a lot of time, like every day, as a morning or evening routine for 15, 20 minutes. And I would literally sit down, write about your feelings, write about your needs. In the anxious attachment style course, there's these rituals of self-connection and habits and questions you can ask yourself for self-connection. And you want to nurture those habits. And then whatever needs he was meeting in the relationship, write them on paper and then go in a column or a space next to that. Write strategies to get those needs met from either other people or from yourself, arguably both. And once you're in that space where you're in relationship to yourself and you're not craving, like needing him, that's when you're healthy to go into a relationship. That's when you're in a good space. Not that you're not healthy now, but that's when you're like in an optimal space to be able to enter into a relationship again. And in the meantime, it's so important to question your stories. So important. We don't have to make up stories that aren't true, but we have to question the ones that aren't true. Because if you pay close attention, and this goes for everybody, this is so important. I can be sitting here doing the webinar, having a conversation with you guys, and I can be in my head right now at the same time. Maybe not when I'm talking, I could be, but let's say I'm like sitting doing work, writing things down. I can be in my head at the same time creating this whole movie in my mind about somebody betraying me and hurting me and leaving me and all these different things. And if I am not conscious that my subconscious is basically creating that movie, as long as that movie's running, my subconscious mind, if I don't have some kind of conscious presence during the process, like of witnessing that and knowing that that's happening, then my subconscious mind is emotionally responding to that whole movie as if it's the absolute truth. And my brain can't tell the difference very well at all. There's tremendous amounts of research to prove this. My brain can't tell the difference very well between what's real and actually happening versus what's imagined. So I'm imagining this whole scenario and I'm literally traumatizing myself. So we have to sort of wake up out of the movie. We all do this. I still have moments of doing this around different things in life. It can be about, what if I don't get this thing done in time or things like that? We can all get into spaces. Some of us have less painful movies and some of us have more painful movies. And they're going to be based on what wounds are not fully healed at this time. And so question that stuff. Can I truly know that this is exactly what's happening? Can I 100% know that this is what's happening? And dump all of the things on paper. There's so much I could say around this, but dump all of the things on paper. This is for everybody. I'm actually going to like full stop here for a second because this is very, very important. This is for everybody. Whatever you are suffering over, you have to process it. The first step to processing is isolating what problems exist in your subconscious. In order to do that, you have to dump everything that exists. So imagine that like you see this pen, pencil, and you see this pencil and you think this is the problem. You think the eraser is the problem. This is a funny analogy because it may not make perfect sense, but you see the tip of it. But underneath, it's kind of like an iceberg beneath the water, right? Underneath, like what you just see at the surface level, there's all these other threads to that problem. And so when we want to come to some kind of resolution, we have to identify all the underlying threads. These are all the parts of the subconscious. So let's say, for example, in Vicky's case, Vicky might go, my ex might be with somebody else. And that appears to be the tip of the iceberg or the problem. And that's causing tremendous suffering. And we can try to work on that story. But if you look very closely and you ask yourself, what does that mean? Or why is that bad? Or what am I afraid could happen? Or what are all the underlying parts of this that cause me pain? And you try to dump them on paper, you're going to come up with a lot of stuff. And all of those problems need to be worked on. So you're going to come up with, I'm going to be alone forever. Like, I'm just giving you some examples. They may not be exactly yours, Vicky, but you'll recognize some of them in here. I'm going to be alone forever. He is going to think somebody's better than me that he's with, and that means I'm unworthy of love. It means that I'm not cared about. It means that nothing we ever had together mattered at all. I'm not going to find anybody. I'm going to suffer from loneliness all the time. I'm never going to find anybody as good as him or who loves me like him. And we all have our layers and layers of stories. Dump them all on paper. Whatever is in any of your guys' mind right now, something you're suffering over, identify the problem and write out all the underlying meaning that you give to the problem. And then question those things. Can I truly know I'm going to be alone forever? Is there any evidence for how that thought may not be 100% real? Is there any evidence that can counteract that thought? Hey, I'm young. I'm still in university. I learning, growing, working on myself, working on my attachment style at such a young age is such a beautiful, powerful thing. And I'm preparing myself for better relationships as I keep growing, or for this relationship to work if I get into a really great, healthy headspace around relationships. Look for all these different pieces of counteracting evidence, not to try to tell yourself, I'm 1000% never going to be alone, but to try to disprove this thought that you are believing. You're trying to argue against this subconscious process that's occurring. And you'll find that you have equilibration and there's relief. And then ask yourself next to that, once you've dug everything up and you wrote out, you questioned all of those things that were causing you pain, then next to it, you want to ask yourself, what do I need to feel better right now? And try to only go, if you're anxious and you're doing this, try to only go for needs you can meet yourself. Don't look at like, I need him to come back. Only look at needs that are in your control, and then create a strategy to get those needs met. And if you do those things and you act on all those steps, you guys will see major, major things shift and turn around, because it's very powerful to be able to do that with and for yourself. Okay. So does that make sense? Because that's really important for everybody. And that's in the emotional mastery course quite a bit. But that is a great place to start. Okay. Let me just make sure I'm not missing any questions. So GHPT says, how would you suggest we do? Hi, GHPT. I don't know what your real name is, so I'm going to call you GHPT. How would you suggest we do the workbook for fearful avoidant on the course? Do we do all exercises at once every day? Oh, it's so funny because I didn't read the second part of your sentence yet. By the way, sorry about my screen name. My name is Anna. Hi, Anna. I'm so happy to have you here. So how do I suggest we do the course? I suggest that for all the exercises that are about awareness, this is a really great question. All the exercises that are about awareness. So what are your BTEA patterns? What are your belief patterns, your thoughts? All those, do them as you go through the course, 100%, like as you're actually going through the stages of the course. The reprogramming patterns, anything that involves reprogramming, so the repetition components, plus emotion, anything that involves that, I would sit with those and I would do something daily. So a daily exercise. So for the fearful avoidance, a lot of it is about noticing your needs daily, questioning your stories daily, doing the daily emotional processing worksheet. I would do those things on a daily basis. If you do the daily actions that are in that workbook for the fearful avoidant, I've had tons of clients do these actions and be really committed to repeating them. You'll see your attachment style transform. It's what I see time after time. It's what I applied for myself. I used to be fearful avoidant. So those are so, so important. It's a wonderful question. So thanks for asking that, Anna. Thank you so much, AJ, for that comment. That's really sweet. I'm actually writing a book right now. So it's about attachment theory. It's not about myself, but I would love to write a book one day about just different insights and different lessons. And that's a bit of a plan that I have. But I had somebody approach me a few weeks ago, and I'm just in the process, and it should be actually, the turnover time is quite quick. So it'll be out by the end of January. So thank you for that. I appreciate that reinforcement. It makes me feel happy and in alignment. Okay. Oh, it's 5 a.m. there. Oh yeah, because Australia's 12 hours ahead. That's so funny. Good. I'm so glad to hear that you're writing your feelings every day, Vicki. That's amazing. And your needs. Make sure you do your needs too. So Jake says, can all us anxious to just date each other? Our avoidant partners don't want us. I'm kidding, guys. In a better mood now that Thais helped me today. That's so nice, Jake. I'm glad to hear that. And you know, the best way that we are all going to be ready for relationships and in a healthy space in relationships is literally going to be when we are in relationships to ourselves. Everything that you're seeking and hoping for in somebody else, if you start really deeply giving that to yourself, like your own intimacy, and I don't mean like physical, I mean like sitting with your feelings, being with yourself, trying to deeply understand yourself, trying to get to the roots of things that are going on inside of you, like these things that we seek in relationships. Not only do we become more powerful at creating those things because we know how to have that conversation and how to go there, and so we can show up and create those dynamics in our relationships more easily because it's very familiar. But that will help anybody who's feeling anxious or on the anxious side of fearful avoidant to feel like they don't hunger in a way that's scary, that feels out of control around relationships. There can be patience and, oh, my partner's not available. Okay, I can go inwards. And so come back to yourself that way. So it's a very important lesson. What is FA going to do? The fearful avoidance are going to often experience the anxious side of the attachment spectrum a little bit more. So it's both. Yeah. How do I stop creating those movies? How do you stop creating those movies? By questioning the validity of them, really, truly. It's knowing that you can't know anything with certainty. So it's not like a control or a pushing down. It's you notice yourself. Think of it this way. You are not your mind. Okay. So I'm going to get really deep here for a second. So you are not your mind. So what you actually are, okay, is the awareness of your mind, of your thoughts. Okay. So it's like subject object. You guys, a few of you probably heard me say this before. If I can see this pencil, I'm obviously not the pencil because I can observe it. So obviously we're two separate entities or things. And the same goes for our mind. If I can observe my thoughts, if I can observe that I'm running a movie, I'm not that. And it's from the space of the observer, which is really basically like my conscious versus my subconscious mind to a certain degree. It's from that higher space of awareness that I can say, hey, I'm going to change this movie. And it won't be easy at the beginning. You know, you can say, oh, here goes the movie again. Here's my mind playing out those old wounds and challenges, right? But when you can observe, you're not identified. I can't witness something and be possessed or consumed by it at the same time. It's not possible. I can't see something and be that thing at the same time. So when we can separate and we can come into our witnessing self and we can notice that the movie's occurring, it's that same higher space of awareness that can control it. Like, okay, I don't want to do this to myself anymore. I'm sorry to myself that I keep doing this. So I would start there. And number 2, after you've questioned it a little bit, so I guess technically number 3. So first step being awareness and disidentifying from being consumed in the movie and living in the movie. Step 2 is questioning it. Can I 100% know this is true? Am I suffering over something that's 100% real, or am I suffering over what could be a potential illusion to a certain degree? This fictitious made up thing that's causing all of my emotional pain. And number 3, I would then work on reparenting. So start giving to yourself in your mind whatever it is that you're seeking. You know, maybe at that moment you need security, validation, that you will find love again, that you can love yourself, that you will heal, that you are okay without this person, you're doing well. Whatever it is, give that nurturing to yourself in whatever form you need it. Okay, so those are the 3 steps I would go through. Great question. Hi, Lisa. How are you? When I clicked watch on YouTube, your phone didn't. Yeah, I'm not sure if the phone will let you go in the forum until you click on YouTube. Okay, thank you for saying that. So I couldn't watch and post until I clicked watch on YouTube itself. Okay, yeah, so you should be able to click on it on YouTube and it takes you right here into the live chat. I also sent out, though, a link just in case. So if you look in the emails, you should have a link that takes you right to this. I just sent it out to members of the community. So you probably explained this already. I put it in an email, but I know it's tough. We're going to get into the swing of everything the first few days until everybody knows how to use the system and get organized. But thank you for sharing that and for the group, because that's really good. I'll do another follow-up email after this too. And then if anybody misses any point or the beginning or middle or whatever it might be, this is always going to be posted as well. So it's recorded and access is there. So I'm going to answer a couple more questions, and then I'm going to dive into the content, and then I'll come back to some of the questions again. Yes, don't think I need them to come back, all anxious people. Hadil Jabbar, nice to meet you, Hadil, from Saudi Arabia. So cool. I want to ask, how does each attachment style behave in the honeymoon phases of... cool. Hold on, I have a question. Hadil, you said I am anxiously attached to a T, but I've really been noticing that I'm no longer experiencing hurt or having painful misinterpretations of my husband's behaviors. I don't know whether this is the result of my awareness. Yes, this is the result of your awareness. I imagine that the T was a dismissive avoidant. And that's what's happening, Adil, that you're doing, I can tell, is you're starting to question your stories. So you're starting to be able to sit there and be like, like you said, your awareness, and with the help of YouTube video and all of that, when you start noticing, you stop personalizing so much. And just the act of not personalizing somebody's behavior so much and trying to understand the sponsoring intention beneath it, like what's the underlying why, is such a beautiful and powerful thing. So it's really amazing. And good for you for doing that. Good for you. But my brain sometimes thinks the bad thing could also be possible. Yes. So it could be possible, but look at this for a second. So this is a really good question. So Vicky said, in relationship to the movie in your mind that we can create, your brain goes, but the bad thing could also be possible. Yes, but your brain is not responding to the bad thing as if it could be possible. Your brain is emotionally responding to the movie as if this is 100% happening. And that's why you're feeling so much pain. So the idea is not to say this good thing could be possible. And, he's only sitting there doing his homework and working, and he's not seeing anybody, and he hasn't looked at another person. Or you're not supposed to be telling something wrong to yourself. You're supposed to be noticing that you were truly suffering over this experience as if it's an absolute, and to pluck back and change the story and notice that, like, this isn't absolutely 100% valid. And this isn't like something where I can 100% know this is going on. And so why am I suffering over something I can't even know? And then to give yourself underneath that, the nurturing or whatever need has to be met to create that sort of equilibration and peace. Okay, so it's not that bad thing could be possible, but why are you suffering over something how many times a day? 10, 15, 20 times a day, maybe 100 times a day, suffering over these little mini movies and thoughts, when we can definitely guarantee that every single time throughout the day that wasn't taking place, and we can't know if it's happening at all. So the idea is to stop suffering over things that we create in our minds with a 100% certainty. Okay, so really great questions. I would definitely not double text at any point. A single text is the most I would ever do, and then wait and be patient. And I know it's hard, but if you've been broken up for 6 months, I would really try to work on moving on at this point, to be quite honest. If it was a couple weeks, I'd be like, okay, different situation. But if it's been 6 months, love yourself, nurture yourself, and I would act as if this relationship is over. And start really pushing my energy and attention into myself and moving on and meeting my own needs and treating it that way. And then if he comes back around, that's wonderful. But it doesn't have to be that way, if that makes sense. Okay. Like, you're not attached to an expectation. And there's a great quote that I love, and it says, people don't break your heart, they break your expectations. And in doing so, they help you get closer to your own heart. And this is true. All of the pain that we're feeling around breakups is pain of fears that are living inside of us as subconscious programs that are coming to the surface. Places that we're missing love, missing connection, missing whatever it might be. And that's the place we want to get reconnected to. So really important. Hi, Maho. Good to see you. So Hadil, to finish your question, you were wondering if, interesting. So I would say, so you're saying, I don't know if it's because of my awareness that I started depersonalizing things, or if I wasn't even anxious in the first place and I was just exhibiting those behaviors due to being in the honeymoon phase. So it won't, great question. It won't work like that. You would see, if you were anxious during the honeymoon phase, once the honeymoon phase is over, you would still have those anxious patterns, at least to a degree. If you weren't anxious during the honeymoon phase, with your husband, then you'd be more likely to be a more avoidant attachment style. But if you felt pretty consistent anxiety during the early stages, chances are you're either going to be fearful, avoidant, and on the anxious side, or anxiously attached. So it sounds to me like the awareness piece is what's really helping, and it will make a really big difference. And the more connected we are to ourselves, because we're doing learning, we're doing work, the less we tend to seek from other people, because we're starting to fill our own cup. And relationships are really hard when we don't fill our own cup. So how do I know if he's fearful avoidant or dismissive avoidant? Because you'll see with the fearful avoidance, they have a great capacity to be super emotionally available and present at times, especially with you and what your feelings and what your needs are. With this dismissive avoidance, you can find them to be like charming and charismatic and fun and like out there, but when it comes right down to it, they usually won't be like really deep emotionally in the early stages of a relationship. Okay? So can you be really sure that you've changed your style of being in a relationship? I feel like I know what to do now, recognize pouncing on situations, but not in a situation to practice it. So what you'll know is when you've changed your style is that you're practicing it. You don't have to rush. Like, this is going to be a little bit easy. This is not going to be like the easiest thing ever because you're going up against years and years of patterns and programs and all these sorts of things. So be patient with yourself during this process, okay? So don't get stuck thinking, oh my gosh, like I have only the awareness and that's it. If you already have the awareness in real time in those situations, just practice like actioning them a little bit more. And if it's hard to do it in real time, practice visualizing it in your mind. So practice like imagining yourself in situations like that. Like, let's say like a conflict that you had yesterday or a week ago or a month ago. Practice imagining that you're redoing that situation and how you would act instead, and practice familiarizing your brain, because your brain, like the more you have these imagined experiences, the more it can cope with those things in real time. It's like brain preparation or priming in a way. So practice moving through those conflicts in your mind. And then once you move through those conflicts in your mind, now you're in a space where you can, you'll feel more prepared in real time as it's happening. So it's a really good question. No, Vicky, I would not say it hurts you when he doesn't reply. We only express the vulnerability when we're in those relationships with people. We have to choose where we're vulnerable a little bit carefully. So you did your part, you reached out, it's been a long time. I would definitely not text him again. Yeah, exactly. He doesn't have obligations. Yeah. And the vulnerability and the I feel and the I need, that's really important to do when we're in a romantic relationship. When we're out of it, the situations become a little bit stickier and trickier. If it's very soon after, but 6 months has been quite a chapter of time. So I would please pour your energy into yourself at this time. The more, the better. Okay. And ask yourself what you're hanging on to so much in him. And are those things that you're hanging on to fully valid? Because sometimes we can hang on to like an idea of somebody for a long time afterwards, instead of the actual person themselves. So, hi, Rizal. Good to see you in here. Welcome. Can you explain how we bring the emotion to life as we do the, cool question. Okay, so I'm going to answer this question and one more. I can't see below at this point because my scroller is up. There's not too many other questions. I think you guys are chatting a little bit, and then I'm going to go into the content, and we'll go into the content for like the next half hour or so. So Rizal says, can you explain how we bring the emotion to life as we do the repetition plus emotion exercise? I'm a little confused about how to do this as I try to neutralize my I am not good enough core belief. Great question. So the idea is to visualize yourself in a way where you're creating the emotion intentionally. And it sounds funny because it's like it's creating the emotion intentionally, but you really truly can do this. So imagine you're saying, I'm good enough because, okay? So you're trying to do the repetition plus emotion to say, I'm good enough because, and you're sitting there and you're trying to think about how I'm good enough. Try to feel what it felt in the moment that thing happened. So for example, I'm good enough because I had that award or that education, or I gave that love to this person and it really helped them, or I show up really well as a great friend, or whatever it might be. When you try to feel what it felt to you and or the people around you when you did that thing, and it will help you to re-elicit those feelings. And it takes focus and it takes presence, but by doing that, you're going to start to see things changing. Okay, really great question. Can you be fearful, avoiding romantic relationships and DA with your parents? Yes, you can. Oftentimes we are a primary attachment style in our romantic relationships, and then different in different areas of our lives. But it can also be the avoidance side of fearful avoidant. It can be either, but you'll see based on like, if you're fearful avoidant with your parents, you'll still open up and tell them a lot of stuff, and then you'll close down, and you'll open up and tell them a lot of stuff and close down. So it can be more, it sounds like in your situation, versus the dismissive avoidant just wouldn't really say a whole lot at all. So it sounds like in your situation, Anna, that you are on the dismissive side of fearful avoidant with your parents. I'm going to imagine, but you can check in. Okay. Hi, John. Good to see you, John. You're in here. I'm DA and often become unable to see my FA suffering and needs. I fall into tunnel sight with my own agenda. Great question. A lot of dismissive avoidance, you go into tunnel vision with your own feelings and needs because you have a little bit more in your nervous system and subconscious programming, like survival, fight or flight responses. So a lot more often, if you pay close attention, you will get into this space where it's like fight or flight. And because you lived a lot of time in fight or flight growing up, because the emotional neglect would have triggered that fight or flight response a lot growing up, feeling like, am I going to be abandoned? Is somebody really showing up for me? What's happening? And just feeling not quite safe in the world. When there's conflict, you'll go even more deeply into that. So I would say to start off with, when you feel yourself come out of that after the conflict is over, I would then turn around and ask your fearful avoidant, like, hey, can we talk about this again? I want to hear and try to practice being present with your feelings and needs. And then listen, and all you have to do is validate the person's feelings. So that will be like enough to start. So if you can notice what the person is feeling, and you can just say, hey, I see that you feel upset. I see that you feel angry. I see that you feel frustrated or hurt. The more you can validate the feelings, the more your fearful avoidant will start to feel calm and heard and seen and understood. So that's a great tool. But if you can't do it in the conflict itself, it's because you don't feel safe enough. So you want to first work on the underlying wound of feeling unsafe, try to reprogram that. Try to tell your fearful avoidant partner that, hey, I feel unsafe in conflict. I need to know that I'm safe, and that will help me be more open and available to your needs. Because nobody's focusing on feeling open and available when they're in fight or flight survival mode. We're all like, survive, right? And so that's really what's happening inside of you. But if you can practice doing it right after the conflict while practicing working on the wound so you can start to feel safer in. Oh, sorry. A window popped up and I thought the webinar just ended. I was like, oh no. So if you can start connecting with yourself a little bit more in that space and teaching yourself that you're safe, that's when you'll start to see things sort of thrive and flourish and move ahead. Okay. So, that is a great space to start. And remember, you can always go after. If in the very early stages, if you don't feel good at the time, after your fearful avoidant finishes getting through that, you can always go to them afterwards and say, hey, I know I couldn't be fully present with your feelings and needs, but I want to try to hear them now if you can express them gently. And you can warm up to it. But again, until you fully work through the feeling of feeling safe, then you'll probably end up in that situation. And it's not your fault. It's just your nervous system responding. Okay? So be gentle to yourself. So what I'm going to chat about with you guys, and then I'd love to hear your questions on it for the next little bit here. And I'll I know the webinar is supposed to be an hour, but I'll stick around here for like another half hour or so. So what I want to talk about is, and if you have to leave or you only had an hour, that's totally okay. And you can watch the replay and things like that too. So what I want to talk about is just how to reprogram the behaviors that we don't like. Okay. So John, we could even use this as an example. So take a moment, everybody, and just identify what a behavior is that you don't like that you do, but find yourself having a hard time breaking the pattern of. So with John's example, he was saying, I feel like I can't be present with my partner's feelings and needs when we're in conflict. So take a moment, and if you have a pen and paper in front of you, I would even recommend writing this on paper, because we're going to do some work around it and just sort of play with this exercise. And the reason I've chosen this exercise for this webinar is because the more live example we have on this, the more we can all start to see our own patterns and sort of dive more deeply into our own awarenesses. So take a moment while I drink water and just look at what patterns you notice yourself playing out. Okay. Sorry, I was really thirsty. So let's say with John's example, if it's okay if I use this example, John feels like, oh my gosh, I can't be present sometimes when I'm in conflict. And I think probably every dismissive avoidant can relate to this, and a lot of fearful avoidance as well. And so you want to ask yourself, what need is my subconscious trying to meet through doing that, through tuning out or having tunnel vision or getting into that space? And the reason you want to ask yourself this is because every single choice, decision, action, behavior that you make is a subconscious strategy to get specific needs met. Okay. So it's these choices that we make are all made out of self-preservation of our identity, of our safety, of our lives, depending on whatever the situation is that we're working with. So ask yourself, what need am I trying to meet through doing this? And John's, for example, might be safety, I would imagine, right? Like trying to feel safe, trying to feel like I can be okay in this situation. So you're welcome. So see if you guys in the chat, if you feel comfortable. Yeah, it's awesome, John, that you're doing this work and showing up and asking these things. It's really powerful. So ask yourself, if you can, what needs, whatever the action is that you're taking that you don't like that you take, are being met in your subconscious mind. And if you guys feel comfortable and want to share some in the chat, like some really common ones I see are things like the expression of anger. I use this example often. And what is anger? Well, anger is a subconscious strategy usually to set boundaries, to get heard, to get seen, to take your power back, to express vulnerably and connect. It can be multiple things. Excellent question. So AJ says accidental criticism or being critical. Unsure what need this meets. So trying to be heard, trying to have your feelings understood. It's usually those two things. I love that one, Shannon. This is a common one for people. So I'm going to go into that for a second. So usually when we're critical, what is it actually? The roots are like, I'm expressing emotion intensely and sometimes a little bit with frustration. And I'm really trying to get heard very hard. And I'm trying to express my emotions and be understood and have my emotions like seen and validated. And so usually it's multiple things there. Do you see? Excellent. And Shannon, eating cookies. So our earliest associations to food are our mother's breast milk, right? Our earliest subconscious programs. And what's our experience like when we're breastfeeding? Well, what happens is we have tons of oxytocin. There's an enormous amount of oxytocin produced between a mother and child when breastfeeding is happening. And oxytocin is the bonding neurochemical. So we have bonding connection associations with food. And we also have security and comfort associations because we're being held, we're being cradled, and we're being, we're held, we're connected, we're safe, we're taken care of, we're in comfort, we're being nurtured. And so a lot of us as human beings go to food when we're not feeling comfortable or nurtured or whatever that might be for you. So then you would write that next to it, whatever really resonates with you there. Okay. What if you were not breastfed? Still the same thing. Great question, Anna. You'd still be like held, cradled, and there's still a bottle, and you might to some degree, because there's probably slightly less oxytocin, but it's still a bonding experience. A parent, a caregiver feeding a baby or a child is still a very powerful bonding experience. It's very nurturing, right? So great question. So you would write out like what that means to you. Eating cookies gives me comfort, security, nurturing, emotional connection in some kind of way, right? Anna says, I'm the same with my parents, but FA in my romantic relationship, trying to be seen to feel important. What is that one about, Anna? I'm so curious. Max is becoming angry when someone interrupts me. It's a really great one. So what need are you trying to meet when somebody interrupts you? So you might be trying to meet the need of taking your power back because you feel like somebody took it away from you when they interrupt you. And so we get angry when we're trying to take our power back. You might be trying to meet the need of protecting yourself because you feel like somebody invaded you when they did that. I see a lot of dismissive avoidance. I know you're not dismissive avoidant, Max, but I notice dismissive avoidants often feel like somebody kind of like bulldozed them and knocked them out of the way. And that can be really painful. And so it's like, trying to get that respect back or that boundary back. But anger is often setting a boundary. Okay. So then what you do, so different comfort behavior. Exactly, Shannon. What would somebody shutting down be meeting? Or is it, safety. Usually when people are shutting down, great question, AJ, they're meeting the need of safety because they don't trust people in conflict or to communicate, or they don't have the better tools. So they're shutting down is trying to keep themselves safe, essentially. So what comes out of this is that when we get into that space, our brain is like, oh my gosh, I'm getting a need met, and it's just trying to meet a need. Your brain is always trying to meet a need in the fastest way possible, not the best way possible, the fastest way. So once you've identified some of your patterns around your needs, like I love trying to be seen, to feel important, right? Once you've identified these needs, then you want to create habits that actively meet these needs on a regular basis for yourself. And you will see this natural coping mechanism that's this old strategy that you use that you don't like that you use, you will see it start to fall away. So next to it, okay, just as an example, we might say, okay, if I'm eating cookies, instead, when I get this, you don't have to do it reactively. I recommend doing this all proactively. Have habits that create more comfort and connection in your life. Maybe you meditate more so you feel self-connection. Maybe you, when you get home from work, you go into your bedroom and you put on like the coziest clothes that you have and your favorite socks and drink a warm tea and just get in your bed and just relax for a few minutes after work and unwind. And then, get into a better space. But have healthy habits ahead of time that give you the comfort, the trying to be seen, Anna, the trying to feel important, seeing your own feelings and giving yourself importance, making your feelings and needs matter and seeing them through. Or Shannon, giving yourself comfort, giving yourself emotional connection, journaling, things like this. As long as we have active habits and strategies, we will start to see those painful coping mechanisms or actions that we don't like that we do. We'll start to see them falling away. And it's a very, very powerful thing to be doing, because all these things you don't like you do are literally feedback mechanisms to let you know, hey, there's some really important stuff here. There are needs in your life that are not being met actively and effectively, and they're coming up in these sort of more painful forms. Does that make sense? Seeking external validation or affirmation when I have to make decisions, beautiful. So, a really good thing to do in there is to ask yourself, what are some habits I can instill that will start cultivating self-trust ahead of time? Okay. And that will be really powerful to do, because what I hear through that is the need that's being met is you're trying to find something stable or secure to trust. You're trying to trust other people more than yourself. And so writing, really getting familiar with your feelings and your needs will also help you when it comes to making decisions. The more indecisive we are is very much correlated with how out of touch we can be with our feelings and needs around those topics and issues. It doesn't have to be as a general rule, but when it comes to making whatever decisions, if there's a pattern, like maybe decisions about your career or your future, or maybe decisions just about your kids or just about whatever it might be, wherever you keep finding that you're seeking external validation, it could be everything. That's a place that you have to build self-trust by becoming more aware and cognizant of your feelings and needs in that area. Does that make sense? These are great questions and insights. For me, I think it's taking time for work on my projects. Otherwise, I get frustrated in my need for growth. Interesting. I get frustrated in my need for growth. Good. So I want to make sure I understand fully. So taking more time for work on my projects, like you expect yourself to grow really quickly through all your projects? Or is it that, awesome, good stuff. Is it that you have competing needs between the want for personal growth and development versus the need for career achievement, and you keep prioritizing growth instead of career? That's my question for you, Max. Because if it's that, then it's just like you said, setting aside conscious time. But if it's that you're judging yourself for not growing fast enough in your career, if that's what you mean, then I would ask yourself, well, what need does that mean? Are you trying to, does your subconscious mind think that, if I am tougher on myself, I'll get ahead? And then, find a more effective strategy to nurture yourself that way, if that makes sense. Okay, so this is a great comment, Anna, and I'm going to go back into a little more content for a few minutes, but you have a lot of resentment towards your parents. This is the hardest thing to heal. They shame me a lot. I don't know how to set boundaries with them and be at peace at the same time. Okay, so so important to define your boundaries ahead of time. Your boundaries can change over time as you have different strategies for healing, different tools. As you start feeling more comfortable, you can update your boundaries and make them a little bit more open so that you can connect a little bit more. But it is very important when you're doing resentment work, and I have a whole course coming out on this in January, but there's so much I want to say here. Let me make this succinct. So when you're doing resentment work, first and foremost, there are unmet needs that you're still struggling over. So resentment is unmet needs plus a lack of communication. Sometimes we won't have the communication piece because sometimes we can't actually trust the people to listen if we communicate. And that might actually be the case. And the truth, hopefully once you've done some of the courses like around conflict resolution that's coming out next month, those sorts of things, you'll start to feel like, oh my gosh, I understand my needs, my wounds, I can communicate them, and I'm in a great space. It doesn't matter how difficult the figure is. But in some very rare cases, we have a borderline parent or we have a narcissistic parent and they're just not willing. And so in that case, we want to define what those unmet needs are that we're angry at our parents for and start meeting them ourselves. Because when we don't feel like there's a void there, there's nothing to feel like we resent somebody else for because we're whole. So if I am mad at my, let's say, mother for not encouraging me enough, and I feel like I'm angry, chances are I'm not encouraging myself enough, and I'm still repeating some of those patterns in the relationship to myself, and they keep causing me pain, and I keep hitting those walls and running up to them in my life, or running up against them in my life, and it keeps causing pain, and then I keep going back in my mind to like my mother and getting frustrated there. So we want to notice where we are continuing to play out those patterns on ourselves that we're angry at our parents for, and correct those patterns, reparent those patterns, become our parents, what we wanted our parents to do, become that in our own lives now, give that to ourselves, and you'll start to see everything else start to take shape differently. Okay, so that's a really important piece. And then I would also say that when you feel like you're ready, do the conflict resolution course and express and communicate with them. I would definitely try to communicate with your parents about what your feelings are, and just ask them to validate your emotions. And if you think that they're not available and you don't feel safe doing it, validate your own emotions around the experience, and then look for how these painful things brought you important lessons that you used on the path to your growth, and how if your parents hadn't been difficult, how your life might have been different. And it's like, this is what I use in post-traumatic growth techniques when I'm doing some deep healing work around trauma for individuals. But we want to look at like, how did this serve us in some way? What were the lessons we got out of it? How were we forced to show up as our own parents at different times? And how is that serving us? And we want to sort of look for the other side of that. And that can be really beneficial as well. I see, Max. I would, to do this in detail, if you haven't done it already, I would take the self-sabotage and procrastination course and go through all those steps, because there's a lot of juicy stuff in there. But it sounds to me like you are foregoing your own goals to be there and support others and not setting good enough boundaries. And so it's important to make sure that you have boundaries and you stick to them at the same time. And you might think that by not setting boundaries, you're more likely to get approval and love, but your need to update the strategy would be give yourself that approval and love by setting boundaries for yourself consciously, intentionally, and sticking to them. So this is great. Okay, so these are amazing shares and questions. So I hope this is all making sense, right? Like, our brain is always just trying to get needs met, and we want to identify what the underlying needs are that it's meeting through these actions or behaviors that we don't like that we take. And then we want to update those things and have healthy, proactive habits in our life that get those needs met ahead of time, so our subconscious mind doesn't have to go into relying on those old painful habits or self-sabotage patterns of behaviors in order to get its needs met. Okay, so I hope that all makes sense. And then what we can do when we add something to that is we can intentionally create positive associations and try to feel about all the good of getting those new needs met, and try to create negative associations to the old needs. Okay, so what doesn't feel good about this old pattern of behavior, and try to feel about how it's actually really painful. And you're teaching your subconscious mind to create new associations. And because the brain's wired to avoid pain and seek pleasure, if there are more negative associations, towards something that was serving you or your subconscious mind kept recreating, if you can create negative associations to that and positive associations to the new active habits you'll have to get those needs met, you'll just start to see that behavior transform even faster and even more. So for example, let's say you're Shannon, you're talking about the eating cookies. So you would look at like what's good about coming home and truly unwinding after work and seeking comfort and seeking connection to myself and journaling and having a habit that I do there, and what feels good about that and what are the long-term benefits of that, and keep like looking at all those things so you're more likely to keep recreating and acting on that positive habit. And then when you take part in doing the habit, try to feel about it. Wow, it feels so good to sit in my bed with a journal and a cup of tea and cozy clothes and just like connect to myself and ask myself about my day and feel about it. And what you'll see is that because you're getting your needs met so positively and in such a strong form in that way, and you've got all those positive subconscious associations, you're like away to the races. And then your brain doesn't need to go to eat cookies to seek comfort because it's a very indirect way. It's better to go directly to the source of comfort. And that's when you'll see things really transforming. So that's my example. And then you can feel about, when I compare that beautiful habit of being in my bed and being cozy and journaling and having my tea and cinnamon or whatever it is, right? When I compare that to cookies, what feels better? What are all the downsides of eating cookies? I feel gross after. I feel frustrated. I feel whatever it might be. And so really anchoring in those feeling associations will make them subconscious programs faster. And then it'll feel like it's very easy to do by comparison. Okay. So great questions and examples. So let's talk about attachment styles for just a few moments. If you guys have some extra time and you're good. I wanted to answer a couple of questions that I saw on the forum about fearful avoidance. Because cool. That's awesome, Max. So I wanted to talk about this because I saw a lot of questions on the forum about like fearful avoidance, not knowing. We'll do a whole attachment style webinar this Tuesday and Saturday, just attachment stuff. But I wanted to talk about how for fearful avoidance, they often get confused. Like, am I anxious? Am I avoidant? Something I noticed for fearful avoidance is this. The fearful avoidant questions, when they question their relationship, they can question so strongly and profoundly because they experience going from their anxious side to their avoidant side, and that juxtaposition only takes place for fearful avoidance. So imagine this. Imagine that dismissive avoidance always have like a little bit of deactivating strategies. It's normal, it happens, it's common. And so they have these deactivating strategies. And let's say they're sitting, every so often when they have the deactivating strategies at like a -3 out of 10 of deactivating. So they're like deactivating and there's some, the charge is like a 3 on the negative side. Let's say that you're a fearful avoidant and you have activating and deactivating strategies. Let's say you can go from a +5 of activating and closeness to a -5 of deactivating. Okay, so you go from that jump of 10 points, and this isn't actually like measurable per se, but like emotionally, we get an idea of how strong the charge is, right? I'm just using this as an analogy. That jump from +5 to -5 often scares the fearful avoidant themselves because it makes the fearful avoidant feel like, oh my gosh, I was just so connected and so happy and so in love. And then I have this huge shift, and it makes the fearful avoidant feel like they're like, oh my gosh, this relationship's not working. And I went from caring to not caring at all. Maybe I don't care about this person. And that shift between their anxious to avoidant side can be really jarring for the fearful avoidant. And then for all the other individuals around the fearful avoidant, right? So their partners, their friends, family members, whatever it might be, because they have both sides, those polarities tend to be more triggering for them first and for others second. And somebody asked me, I saw like 5 or 6 different questions about this on the forum this week. So I just wanted to touch on that and share about that because I think that's a really powerful thing to notice. And it's not that your feelings are changing so much, it's that your emotional state is changing, which is making you think thoughts like, oh my gosh, this is ending. And then those thoughts and emotions are basically recycling themselves and feeding on themselves. So the more avoidant you feel, the more negative thoughts you have, the more negative thoughts you have, the more avoidant you feel, and so on and so forth until you're out of that emotionally triggered state. So I hope that makes sense. So does anybody have, I'll touch on 2 other questions that came up for me. A lot of individuals ask me, and I see this question all over. A lot of individuals ask me, like, how can I tell if I'm fearful, avoidant, or anxious? I made a couple of videos about this once, and it's in the attachment style courses as well. But just so you know, you can tell the difference because, so because how you can tell the difference is fearful avoidants are usually more emotionally attuned to others, whereas anxiously attached individuals can still be very attuned to others, but they're attuned to like their own expectations quite a bit from relationships as well. Fearful avoidants are almost like exclusively attuned to others, and then usually they feel resentful and frustrated over time, and then kind of like cut a person off or shut down or push them away. So you'll be able to tell if you're fearful, avoidant, or anxious based on like how close the ratio is of exhibiting anxiety in relationships to avoidance. So if you have like a lot of anxious tendencies and then a lot of avoidant tendencies, you're going to be closer to fearful avoidant. If you have mostly like 90% anxious and then 10% fearful avoidant, you're definitely anxious with like a tiny bit of avoidance in you. So it's all like a spectrum, and you can sort of gauge it along the spectrum that way. But I hear that question a lot, and it came up a lot this week. So that's how you can tell the difference between anxious and fearful avoidant, how often you feel anxious and needy, and like you have the activating strategies. And fearful avoidance often shut down out of feeling hurt. Dismissive avoidance shut down out of fear of vulnerability a lot, and fearful avoidance shut down out of when they feel hurt or triggered by their partner, and they feel like, I can't trust this person, they just really hurt me, etc. Lisa, that specific aspect of fearful avoidant, John says, I get really hurt from criticism, confused about how to, with my sensitivity, change other people by setting clear boundaries or change my sensitivity. Good question. Okay, so the answer to this question is your sensitivity is a gift if you apply it correctly. So I think we come into this world with an innate sensitivity, and then we get conditioned away from it or out of it, and we try to numb or repress our feelings and all those things. I also don't think the sensitivity really goes anywhere. It just gets repressed. So I think that we never really want to work on repressing our sensitivity. I would say that's like a repression of ourselves. It would be like trying to repress that we're hungry or thirsty or, things that are biological coping mechanisms and there to serve us. And if we repress them, then we become out of function. We become in dysfunction. So what is really important is to work through your stories, because sensitivity and reactiveness are 2 very different things. So we can feel a lot, but if we feel something and then we make a painful story out of it and then we react to that painful story, that's very different. So that's one thing I would note. You might not be reactive, but it's something to note, because that's often something I see. It's like if I feel sensitive because I noticed something happened and my partner acted differently, and then I make it mean that they don't care, and then I get reactive, then I just took my own sensitivity and hurt myself with it. But by comparison, if I can be in a space where it's more like I notice my sensitivity, I notice my story, and I recognize that I feel like my partner doesn't care about me, and then I can work through the story a little bit and then go underneath it and express the needs of my partner. Hey, I'm feeling a little bit off and I need a little bit of validation or reinforcement. That would be wonderful. If you come from that space, then you enter into a much healthier dynamic and situation. And then that sensitivity is a gift, because it's there to highlight and magnify any negative emotions that you're having and feelings that you're having. And we need the awareness as the first step to move through anything. So the more sensitivity we have, generally the more heightened our awareness has the capacity to be. And the more heightened our awareness can be, the faster we can start doing the work, and the more deeply we can move into things around our work. And so that's the goal. So to keep checking in with the stories, John, and then keep asking the needs underneath. And remember, just because we express a need, if we express needs all the time and people just don't meet them, then we're probably around the wrong people. But if we express needs a lot and people meet them and they do pretty well, but then they mess up sometimes and make mistakes, that's normal. Because people are going to forget, they're in their own mind. They have to get into their own habits of understanding your needs and practicing them enough that it becomes a new normal in the relationship. So if you're, asking for your needs and the person doesn't show up at all, or says they're going to show up and doesn't, or things like that, then we're not in a good space. But if we express our needs, see them through, if we express our needs, somebody doesn't show up, then it's our job to remind them from time to time and see them through and make our needs worthy and valid. Okay? Really great question. Emotional state versus emotions. Interesting. Is that a question? Are you Anna, are you asking me what the difference is? Because the difference would be, and it's a cool point, your emotional state would be the experience of your emotions at a given point in time. Your emotions themselves are the emotions that you're experiencing. Okay, beautiful. Okay, so, and, it's really good as well to notice that we also have patterns of emotions. So I won't go too far into this, but we have patterns of emotions that we experience. So oftentimes, some people feel triggered and their triggering feeling is trapped, helpless, powerless, and that's a big emotional pattern for them. And that can be their emotional state, but it can also be the pattern of emotions they experience. Well, another person might hardly ever feel trapped. Maybe somebody anxious hardly ever feels trapped, but they feel alone, afraid, anxious, worried. And maybe that's something that, for example, dismissive avoidant doesn't feel as much. And so we also have our emotional patterns that are basically repetitive emotional, are the repetition of an emotional state. And so we want to get really clear on what our individual emotional patterns are as well, because I like to compare it to like being in the dark somewhere and you're trying to find your way around and it's really hard. But if you turn on the lights in that place and you see everything and where it is, and then you turn the lights back off, even if the lights are off again, you have a better capacity to move around in that space because you've already seen where everything is in the light. And it's the same idea. The more familiar we become with our own emotions, our own thought patterns, our own unconscious actions or coping mechanisms, our own belief patterns, the more easy they become to navigate when they are at the surface, when they have risen up, if that makes sense. So Lisa says, sorry, you said our emotions are not changing in relationship, but our emotional state. You were talking about FA versus AA. I don't really know what you mean. But our emotional state. I'm not quite sure what you mean. If you want to share, that would be wonderful, or expand on it. Emotions are not changing. I don't know. Okay, so Lisa says, FA for me means I need to know my feelings before I date again, so I can set boundaries and not lose myself again. I have to really pay attention and question my story. Also remember to self-soothe. That's really beautiful. Those were like very, very on point steps for the fearful avoidant. Like, in order to know your boundaries, you have to understand your feelings first, because your feelings and your needs, that's what a boundary is. It's basically the expression of your feelings and needs. And remembering to self-soothe keeps you rooted and grounded in yourself as a fearful avoidant, and you're less likely to go on the anxious side of fearful avoidance, which then will be really painful for the fearful avoidant, because then sometimes the fearful avoidant gets anxious and they feel vulnerable and they feel rejected, and then that triggers them very deeply from the other side and they become super avoidant. So it's very good that you're in that space. So that's really, really important and powerful. Good for you. To not lose yourself again, and questioning your story is probably the most important thing to do as a fearful avoidant. So Max says, do you think that fearful avoidance might become dismissive avoidant when advancing, making emotional progress? My dismissive side has been very helpful with my boundaries. This is a great question, because here's the answer to this. The answer to this is that, okay, so sometimes the fearful avoidant is so attuned to other people that when they start becoming attuned to themselves, they almost interpret it like they're becoming dismissive avoidant, when actually that might be you becoming secure. So we might feel, and we feel like we're becoming dismissive avoidant according to the stories or unconscious expectations about how people should behave in relationships because of the programming we had from childhood. So for example, let's say there's Bob and Jan. And let's say Bob is fearful avoidant and he thinks he's supposed to show up for people 24/7, always being there, always going out of his way. And he thinks that, and Jan, let's say, is more dismissive avoidant and, keeps to herself and and sort of looks out for herself a little bit first, and can sometimes be in that more sort of like tunnel vision mindset, I think John was mentioning, and sort of the blinders on. And it's because she's a lot more in fight or flight. And so her nervous system is more in survival mode, which just naturally makes her less available for others, because hello, we're surviving over here. So let's say Bob starts to become, he starts to set boundaries. He starts to show up for his own needs. He starts to, look out for himself differently and take time for himself differently. He might think, hey, I'm becoming dismissive avoidant, whereas it might just be his expectations about how people should act in a relationship that are making him think that he's dismissive avoidant. Does that make sense? It's like sometimes those things are actually healthy and those are moving us into a secure place. But because when we break out of codependency, we feel like there's it can be so shell shocking when we start to break down our patterns of codependency that we're like, oh my gosh, am I becoming dismissive avoidant? So I would you'll know, because if you're becoming dismissive avoidant, you'll see that you start to really shift and you're repressing your feelings more and more in like a fight or flight state and feeling unsafe. But if you're just like having better boundaries and things like that, you might just be turning really secure, Max. But that's a really cool question, because I've seen a lot of people go through that transition and they get confused about that as well. When FA are questioning if they still have feelings for somebody. When FA, okay. Thanks for sharing that, Anna. Spot on for me as well. Yes, that was a beautiful like little paragraph there, Lisa. Is there any way to predict the flip-flop of FAs, or are they so out of touch with their own emotions that sometimes it's impossible for others to predict? Good question. Okay, really good question. You can predict the pattern of FAs not because there's a pattern in the emotions, but if you start to pattern what their triggers are. So if a fearful avoidant starts overextending themselves and overgiving and not receiving, you're going to see them get triggered at some point soon. If a fearful avoidant starts feeling unseen, like they're like really giving a lot of emotional energy and then not receiving, they're going to get triggered soon. If a fearful avoidant feels unimportant or like they don't matter or they're forgotten about or something like that, it's going to come. All that pullback is going to come. So it's less about like noticing a pattern in terms of like a timeline and more about really understanding their core wounds and being aware of those things. And by being aware of their core wounds and noticing what could come up, you'll be able to see when those core wounds are being triggered, and then you can nip those in the bud. And it's not your responsibility, but you could say to somebody, hey, you do matter. You are cared about. Express your needs to me, and I'm happy to try to work on meeting them. I can't be perfect, but I can try, but you need to express. Or, hey, I notice that you're frustrated right now. Is it possible that you're overgiving and then you're not allowing yourself to receive? Because you feel like if you receive too much, you're unsafe and unworthy of love. And like, so know their triggers. That would be my advice. And their triggers are things like, I am unheard, I am unseen, I don't matter, I am trapped, I am helpless or powerless is really big. I am unsafe. I am not good enough. I am unimportant. I don't know if I said that one already. I am abandoned a little bit, but actually not as much as a general rule. It's more like I'm forgotten about or I don't matter. But I'm abandoned can come up too. So the more there are, you can be aware of their triggers. I'm stupid is a one for a fearful avoidant if they feel foolish. The more you know what triggers and I am taken advantage of if they ever feel like there's an imbalance, because they tend to just naturally overgive to try to earn their worth. I am unworthy is probably their most painful one. And what happens is when they overextend themselves to try to earn their worth and love from a partner, and then the partner doesn't reciprocate at some point in time because they forget or whatever it might be, then what happens is that triggers the feeling of unworthiness for the fearful avoidant, which is probably their greatest wound. And then they get really upset and frustrated, and then they become avoidant. I suppose as they are an ex, it's just back to that being scared to ask them. Yeah, I would just know their core wounds really strongly. And then I would, listen, AJ, my dear, if you feel really afraid of the fearful avoidant, like not I know you're not like afraid, but if you feel uncomfortable, then you want to make sure too that the person's healthy enough to be with you, because you're here, you're showing up, you're doing the work, you're asking these really powerful, insightful questions. Like, obviously you're really self-aware. You're, like, give yourself some credit and make sure that this person can show up and be a fair match to you for what you deserve at the same time. Okay. But in the meantime, if that's the route and you feel like this person is and they can be, then just notice their core wounds. Just be aware of them and validate them ahead of time in conversations, things like that. And that'll get you into an easier space for communication. So I'm going to answer these last 2 questions here, or these last 2 comments, and then I'm going to run. And I love doing these webinars. I just love chatting with all you guys. Anna says, as a fearful avoidant, looking back on my relationship with my dismissive avoidant, I was so hyper attuned to the moves, reactions, emotions. I am so tired now, and I lost all my energy doing this. Okay, here's a really beautiful thing, Anna. The hypervigilance is not bad. The hypervigilance is neutral. What you do with the hypervigilance becomes bad or good, tiring or empowering. So I'm an fearful avoidance. Like, my personality still has a lot of the fearful avoidant characteristics, like the hardworking and the being really attuned to people and like really feeling for others. A lot of those things still exist, right? And those won't really go away. But if I notice little shifts in body language, emotions, micro expressions, all that kind of stuff, reactions, and I make a story about it, it is hard times. It's going to be really painful, really tough. If I can question my story, so let's say somebody withdraws, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I can feel them withdrawing. They don't care about me. They don't love me anymore. Ouch, really, really painful. And remember, any story that we don't surface to the conscious level and question, we're emotionally responding to as if it's the absolute truth. So we want to do that work, okay? So we want to be able to question and see what's going on and not just necessarily buy into the whole story. And if we can start doing that and being masterful at that, we'll see if the stories stop coming back so much. And we can notice a shift and be like, oh, maybe they're just tired, or it could be anything. And we can kind of like opt out of that game that our brain tries to play with us. And then when we need to use it, we can. When we're, for me, it's a gift when I work with clients, because I notice like all these little tiny things, and they might be telling me a story and I can be like, hey, that pause right there, because I can see that there's something deeper there, because I see like their body language close, or, and it can be a gift in relationships and closeness and having conversations. It can be a gift if like you're ever doing any kind of work in a field that requires something like this. There's so many gifts about the hypervigilance. You're 10 steps ahead of other people in certain areas sometimes, and work and in all these different areas. And we, maybe not 10 steps ahead. And I'm not saying that in like a glorifying the fearful avoidant way. Everybody has hypervigilance in their own ways, and everybody has the ability to access that. But just notice that it's not always this. The hypervigilance isn't the bad thing. It's if you create the story, and you have the power to question the story, and that can undo the exhaustion around it. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. It's really important to do that work. Because I bet you told the story so many times, Anna, my dismissive avoidant partner doesn't care. And maybe a lot of the time he was just afraid or feeling insecure or in fight or flight mode and needed to withdraw and wasn't emotionally available. And a lot of it may not have been that he didn't care about you in the relationship. It might have been about things that were going on inside of him. So thanks, so helpful. I'm indeed a bit confused with myself during this process, but still I'm not afraid of being vulnerable and sharing emotions. That's beautiful. Beautiful job, you guys. Okay, so I am going to run. I will be back again for a webinar with more questions. We're going to talk just about attachment styles next week. So the webinar will be this Tuesday at 8 p.m. Eastern. If you miss it, it will be posted in the webinar library. And you can sort of check back in there. And then we'll have another one Saturday at 3 p.m. And we'll always do this for the next few weeks. And then we'll tweak time so anybody who can't attend those times still has the opportunity to attend other times. So we'll change times every month or so, just to make the times available for everybody. And they're always pre-recorded. So if you ever miss them, they will be there. So thank you guys so much. Thank you, Anna and AJ and John and Jackie. I know that's not your name, but I just wanted to tease you. All of these, you guys are beautiful and really insightful questions. Really, really great to see you guys doing this work. And bye, Stuart. And if you guys have any other questions or anything like that, check in the forum, post your stuff in there, the Facebook group, and I will be there to check in. Thank you, Anna and Lisa and Anna again. Awesome. Really great to see you guys. Anna, I'll remember your screen name next week. If you keep the same one, it's okay. Thank you guys so much and have an amazing rest of your day. Okay, bye.